But this week is about another thing of how to get more alkaline, because to be superhuman, we need to be more alkaline. And the way we get alkaline is to avoid acid-forming foods. So what are some foods that make us acidic? Well, as I've already covered earlier, grains are very acid-forming. There's only a few grains that are not acid-forming, and I did talk about that, but those are things like quinoa, millet, amaranth, and maybe teff flour. Sometimes buckwheat, although buckwheat's a little more acidic. But that just depends on how alkaline you are. So grains can be very acidic, especially things like flours, fried foods, processed foods. I think fried foods are the #1 most acidic food there is. So avoiding fried foods is key. Anything with heated oils is going to be really acidic. And then on my list today, probably the two most disease-causing foods. I wonder if anybody out there can guess. If you can guess, post it. What do you think are two of the most disease-causing foods that we eat as Americans on a huge scale? Like probably we eat more of these two items. They can be found in the refrigerator section in your grocer. And they're something that most people consume, and there's a lot of controversy over whether or not they're healthy for us or not healthy for us, even in the arena of health. So can anybody guess what those two things are? Just type it in your little bar there if you can guess. Gluten, that's Janine. That's right. Gluten is very acid forming, but that's not the one I'm talking about because I already talked about that last week. But yes, gluten is very acidic, so it's probably up there with these two other things. But these two are probably even more detrimental to the health, and one of them is known to cause cancer when you eat it in large amounts. So if you can think of it, type it in. Dairy, yes, Jennifer, thank you. Thank you for answering, Jennifer. So one of them is dairy. And I just have a little story to tell you guys about my dairy experience. So a lot of you guys who know me know some of the stuff about my story, but I was born with really bad diaper rash. And so it's a form of candida, which is thrush. And my mom wasn't able to breastfeed me, so she fed me cow's milk from birth, cooked pasteurized cow's milk. And she said, the worst diaper rash her doctor had ever seen, and he was actually yelling at her because my diaper rash was so bad. So that when babies have diaper rash, that's a form of yeast or fungus in the body. And so that was just the beginning of my problems. So of course I grew up on cow's milk, eating all the Velveeta cheese. Velveeta cheese isn't even real cheese. For you, this is kind of a throwback. But for those of you guys you millennials who don't know what Velveeta cheese is, you probably still do. I think they use it on nachos and like ballparks and on hot dogs. But it's basically a fake, big, huge orange block of cheese that's not really cheese. So I grew up on that because we didn't have a lot of money. So it was just Velveeta cheese and milk. And my mom would even sometimes reconstitute our milk, like the powdered milk, and try and sneak it in on us by putting it back in the fridge. And we're like, Mom, that's gross. That's powdered milk. But anyway, I had ear infections. I had so bad that I had to get my ears punctured. I had my tonsils out. My glands were constantly swollen. And I didn't know why. I had no idea it was because of dairy. And I also started to get cystic acne in my late teens, early 20s. And lo and behold, when you research dairy and the health effects of it, all those things come up, all the things I had. So if you know anybody who has kids that get chronic nasal congestion or ear infections, tell them to get their kids off dairy. If you know adults that, I know so many adults that they actually go and get surgery because they have that constant clogged nasal passages and they're always getting nasal infections. So they're like, oh, I have a deviated septum, or they think they have all these problems that, oh, I was just born that way. But as soon as people go off dairy, all that stuff starts to disappear. And what about asthma? Did you know that the #1 way to start curing asthma is just to get the person off of dairy? It can hugely affect their asthma reactions. So these are all things that we should know. We don't know this because guess what? And I'm speaking for the US and Canada and probably Australia. Those are the big 3 countries I know for sure this happens in, is that the dairy industry is subsidized by the government. So it's way cheaper for us to buy milk on the stores, like for someone to go to Kmart, or not Kmart, but like 7-Eleven and buy a gallon of milk, than it is to get like bottled water. So of course people are going to drink milk, but it's only because the government's paying for it. And it's so costly in the form of healthcare, in the form of just what we suffer through. Like I see these kids, these young teens, these boys with this acne, and it's so bad that I'm in pain for them, and you can see the look in their eyes that they're just humiliated to be in public. We've all seen those people. And I just want to go up to them and say, please just stop eating cheese and dairy. Your skin is going to improve. I mean, that and fried food, right? But like, how much can our life improve just by going off dairy? So one other thing I had a ton of, and I remember this thinking, oh, I just inherited this from my mom. There's nothing I can do about it. Because that's what I used to believe before I went into raw foods 20 years ago, is that I just inherited these bad conditions, this bad skin, these bad gut pains. You guys, anybody out there ever suffered from so much gut pain that you're just doubling over? And it's gas, but it's not the kind of gas that wants to come out. It's like it's trapped within your upper intestines and your internal system, so that you're just in misery and bloated and in pain. Well, lo and behold, as soon as I went off dairy, my stomach flattened out, the gas went away, I was able to actually wear tight jeans without suffering anymore. So like, I really wish that we could I wish, but I also know this is one of the things I would really love to do. And I know, like, I see that Kristen's on here, and Kristen works with people to kind of help educate teens and help educate these kids in schools about what dairy can actually do to their body, and how giving it up is so, it's just so beneficial to us. And as you guys know, you guys that know me know, I'm like the nut milk girl. I'm the nut milk queen. I invented the very first amazing nut milk bag. Well, very first nut milk bag ever. It's in the cone shape, which you guys probably see everywhere now. But the reason I did that is because I wanted to make my own almond milk. And since then, I've made every kind of nut and seed milk under the sun. And they taste amazing. You can make them rich and creamy. So, you don't have to be deprived to go off nuts or to go off milk. You just have to know your substitutes. I also make lots of cheeses that are made from nuts and seeds. And I think I showed you guys how to make a cheese sauce in another Facebook Live earlier a few weeks ago. But also I do have a whole course on how to make your own cheeses, which I love. I think it's fascinating just to culture food and learn how to make your own. So it's really empowering to know that you don't have to eat these foods and you don't have to be deprived. So let's see, what else do I want to say about dairy? Well, it's also, people say, well, we need, like, and I remember this was beat into me, like, as a kid, that we need dairy to what? For what? What mineral do we supposedly get from dairy? Does anybody know? How do you make it creamy? Oh, okay. So I'll answer your question in a second, Janine. But does anybody know what disease we're supposed to prevent by drinking dairy, by drinking milk? And we're supposed to like up the levels of in our body? Calcium, that's right, Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, that's 2 for 2. Good job. Yes, so we're supposed to be drinking milk to get calcium, but why is the U.S. one of the largest consumers of dairy? And also, Jennifer got it 3 for 3, osteoporosis. So we are the highest in osteoporosis. All of our senior citizens are getting broken bones and broken hips because of all the milk they're drinking. We're getting brittle, hollow bones. And let me just explain what that means and what that is. What happens when we drink something like milk on a regular basis, or eating cheese all the time, or eating really acid-forming foods, we basically are depleting our mineral supply because it's very acidic, and the body cannot live in an acidic environment. It creates disease. So in order for our blood to get more alkaline to keep us alive, it needs to steal minerals from somewhere. So it's like, I need alkaline minerals, and calcium is an alkaline mineral. So where do our minerals hang out? Like, where does calcium hang out? In our bones, right? So as soon as our pH starts to drop, and this, I'm not talking about our body pH, I'm talking about our blood pH, because we know bodies get acidic. That's why we get cancer. That's why we get disease. But blood cannot get acidic. I mean, it's the end of our life if we get too acidic in our blood. So it starts to rob minerals from the bones to keep itself alkaline. So as long as there's alkaline minerals in our bones, it's going to keep stealing the minerals from us. So that's what happens, and that's simple science. You can look that up. It's basically, we're trying to stay alkaline, and we're taking the minerals from ourselves. I just find it so fascinating. We're actually killing ourselves with our food all the time. So one of them is that we get the osteoporosis, or you've heard of osteopenia, which is the thing that comes before osteoporosis. So to get strong bones, you need to do what? Stop eating dairy and replace it with things like almond milk and all the nut milks. Sprouted almonds actually have a lot more calcium in them than milk does, and so does broccoli. So to answer your question, I think it was Janine that asked this. To make a nut milk creamy, I actually did do a video on that, I think 2 weeks ago on Facebook Live. But basically you can blend in a little, like after you make the almond milk, you can blend in like a scoop of coconut oil into the blender and like a teaspoon of non-GMO soy lecithin, and it'll cream it up beautifully. It'll be so amazing and silky, creamy, smooth. And also use less water. So if you want it really fatty, creamy, just use like 2 cups of water to 1 cup of nuts. Okay, and if anybody has questions, I just posted today on my page how to make nut milks on there, so just go there. There's a whole video on it. So the next thing that it does is there's, as people know, like, you know, maybe some of you guys who are watching today know like about organic food, and probably if you are still consuming dairy, you're eating it organic. But a lot of people don't know about the benefits of organic, and so when you're feeding your kids, or you're drinking cow's milk, and that's not organic, and cheeses, it's full of hormones. So they're giving them tons of growth hormones to make the milk grow in. So when we get those growth hormones in our body, it makes us grow. It makes little boys grow boobs. All kinds of crazy stuff happens to our bodies when we get these extra growth hormones, and it's not good stuff. It causes premature aging. It causes cancer. Anything you can imagine tied to hormone imbalance is going to happen. It really throws us off. And then it's also, I don't know if people know this, but it's actually high glycemic. So milk, when it gets into the body, can be super high glycemic. When you even read how many grams of sugar are in milk, it's actually quite higher than you would expect. So those are just some things about why not to drink milk. So Liz asks, oh, she just shared your video. Great, thanks. And let's see. The next thing is, what's the second thing you guys think I'm going to talk about? These are both animal products, just to kind of give you a clue. What's the second highest disease-causing food that's creating a lot of acidity in our body? And it starts with an M for, say it! Red meat. You know, most animal flesh is acidic, is acid-forming, but red meat is the most #1 detrimental. And I know there's a lot of paleos out there, a lot of people today talking about eating grass-fed beef. It's probably a step in the right direction, because at least with grass-fed, they're not feeding them hormones, and they're not, I don't know if they're suffering. I have no idea how their grass-fed animals are slaughtered. They never talk about that. They just talk about that they're healthier, which I agree that they would be. However, there's a lot of things about red meat, and I know we have this one whole compartment about animal cruelty, and even that being off the table, like, yes, we don't want to torture animals. That's #1. The second thing is, even if you're like on board with that, or you're not, so if you're just not on board with that, the second thing is just think about your own health. And the thing about it is, meat is really hard to digest. It takes a super long time for that to go through our super long intestinal tract. So they say it takes up to 7 days for meat to exit your system entirely once you eat it. And there's no fiber in meat, so there's no, like, unless you're eating with a ton of vegetables, there's no way to really help push it through. And it's also very acidic, acid forming, like I mentioned before. It can lower your pH and make you more acid, which is disease causing. And then I have some actually information facts about it that many studies have been done on this. The China study is all about this, but there's a lot more studies coming out that are talking about the exact same thing, where they're testing this on rats or testing it on mice, but they're finding that when the animal protein is consumed, more than 5% of your diet is animal protein, the cancer gene turns on, and as soon as you go below 5%, it switches it off. So, you know, if you are eating animal protein and you still want to have some, keep it under 5%, which is not very much. You'd have to do the math and divide like all your meals and find out how much that is, but it wouldn't be very much in a week. But what I'm trying to get at with this is, cancer is running rampant in our society. And if you look at what our diet is, it's things that cause cancer, high protein foods like meats and dairy and all the other animal meats. But also I was going to say something about that, so that it's causing cancer, but also it's environmentally impactful as well. So I did a little research here, and it said eating less red meat would be a better way for people to cut carbon emissions than if they gave up their cars. And you guys have probably heard that, but cars are not as harmful to the environment as the gas that cows put off. And the other thing is, like, we're talking about world hunger, and by 2050 we're expected to have an extra 2 billion people on the planet. And the only way to be able to feed those people is to stop growing grains to feed to the cattle, eliminate that middleman, because the cattle's the middleman, right? He's eating the grains, people are eating the cattle, and they're getting what the cow ate, the grasses and stuff. So eliminate that cow and just have the grains and have all those other things available. And yes, I did mention last week that grains are acidic, but if we're talking about feeding the planet and you're not over consuming those things, you know, they're a way better way to feed people than to try and keep raising more cattle and destroying rainforests and on and on. And you guys know about the environmental impacts of cows, I hope, or of cattle. But I'm just kind of trying to educate you guys a little bit more here about it. So that's kind of just the gist of the environment thing and how that works. It's just a really huge environmental impacts, probably more than we know. And then with health, I talked about that, and it says that large studies in England and Germany showed that vegetarians were about 40% less likely to develop cancer compared to meat eaters. So you're lowering your risk by 40%. I mean, and I'm sure all of us have some kind of little thing in the back of our mind, like, what's going to keep me from getting cancer? Like, everybody around me is dropping like flies, getting cancer, getting tumors, getting stuff. Like, what's going to keep me? And we don't really know all the things that cause cancer. I mean, a lot of it's just environment, and we don't have as much control over it. But as I said in my webinar that I gave last night, is the one thing we do have control over is what we put in here, right? So you guys have control over that still. We don't know what's going on with the government. We don't know what's going to happen. There's this crazy stuff happening in the world of finance and politics and all of it. But we do still, today anyway, have control over what we put in our mouth. And at least we know that we can say no to certain things. So I'm just inviting you guys today to just kind of do more research on what meat and dairy are doing to us and how they're impacting not just our environment, not just our bodies, not just the animal torture, but the whole big picture. Like, the more studying you do, the more documentaries you watch on even just how animals are treated, the more shocking it becomes that we're actually allowing this to continue in our world. It doesn't even make any sense. It's like if you knew a bunch of children were being abused somewhere and nobody was doing anything about it. And I know that does happen in other countries and that crazy stuff too, but the way that we can vote is with our dollars, and we vote by not eating these foods, and then you're going to also notice it in your health how much better you feel. So it's just a win-win just to start thinking about giving up meat and dairy if you haven't already. I have so many amazing substitutes for that in my online courses.